April 16, 1943. Northern Burma. The air is heavy, wet, unmoving, thick enough to taste. A Japanese patrol moves in single file along a narrow animal trail, rifles ready, eyes scanning the green wall of the jungle. The heat has stripped their uniforms to sweat-stained rags. Leeches cling to their boots. Every few seconds, a twig snaps or a cicada shrieks, and every man freezes, finger tight on the trigger. Then a voice, soft, distant, in Japanese. "Forward company, hold your fire." The lieutenant jerks his head up. The words echo strangely, carried by the canopy, almost like a whisper between trees. The soldiers glance at each other, pale with confusion. No Japanese units are supposed to be nearby. The voice comes again, closer this time, clear, commanding, and wrong, because no one can see where it's coming from. The men drop into cover. One radio's headquarters, but the line is dead. The voice fades into static and jungle noise. Minutes later, laughter, faint, mocking, ripples through the darkness. Something unseen is talking to them, and it's speaking their language. For weeks, Imperial Japanese Army patrols in the Burmese jungle reported these phantom orders, invisible units giving commands, footsteps without soldiers, messages that vanish mid-sentence. Officers accuse their men of exhaustion, heat stroke, or cowardice. But as the days passed, more reports arrived, outposts breaking radio silence to report ghost voices, then going silent forever. To the Japanese, it felt like the jungle itself had turned against them. But it wasn't ghosts. It was the Chindits, a new kind of British Special Operations Force under Brigadier Orde Wingate, fighting in the most brutal terrain on Earth. And this was just the beginning of their psychological war. Before the Japanese ever heard the talking jungle, they had already learned to fear its silence. The Chindits, named after the mythic Burmese guardian lion, the Chinda, were unlike any soldier Japan had faced before. Hand-picked from British, Indian, and Gurkha regiments, they were trained to live, move, and kill in places even tigers avoided. Their mission: penetrate deep behind enemy lines, cut Japanese supply routes, and vanish before a counterattack could form. By early 1943, Wingate's men had done the impossible. They'd marched hundreds of miles through jungle so dense it could swallow sound and sanity. Leeches, snakes, monsoon rains, all constant companions. Malaria and dysentery hit harder than bullets. But to the Chindits, the jungle wasn't an obstacle. It was camouflage. It was home. Wingate, a gaunt, bearded visionary with piercing eyes, believed that psychology was as powerful as firepower. He told his men, make the enemy feel hunted in his own country. So they began to wage a war of illusion. Deep inside Japanese territory, Chindit radio operators built makeshift transmitters, hidden under bamboo huts, buried in termite mounds, or disguised as Japanese field gear. Using captured frequencies, they intercepted and mimicked Imperial Army radio traffic. They didn't just listen. They answered. A patrol would request supplies. A calm voice would reply, in perfect Japanese, directing them to a new rendezvous point. When they arrived, there would be nothing but jungle and silence. Sometimes snipers. Other times landmines. The jungle had learned to talk. By May, entire Japanese companies were refusing to move without written confirmation of orders. Rumors spread of ghost units, invisible enemies who could hear every word and strike without warning. The more frightened they became, the more mistakes they made. Patrols shot at shadows, set up ambushes against their own men, even abandoned outposts after hearing phantom voices in the night. The Chindits had turned fear into a weapon, but their campaign was far from over, and the jungle itself was about to strike back at them, too. June 2nd, 1943. Somewhere near the Irrawaddy River. Rain. Endless, merciless rain. For the Chindits, the jungle that had once been their shield was now their prison. Radios shorted out in the humidity. Supply drops missed their coordinates, and malaria raged through the ranks like wildfire. Men collapsed mid-march, delirious from fever. The stench of rot clung to everything: uniforms, boots, even skin. A Gurkha sergeant named Kumar Limbu scrawled in his journal, "We no longer fight the Japanese. We fight the jungle itself." Their mission had worked too well. The Japanese were confused, paranoid, but now they were angry, determined. Entire battalions were sweeping the forest, hunting for the invisible ghost army. The Chindits could no longer move freely. The hunters had become the hunted. Wingate's men relied on mules to carry their radios and ammunition. When the animals died, and they often did, the soldiers dismantled the radios, carried the components by hand, and rebuilt them miles away. Every message home was a gamble. Every transmission a whisper into darkness. At night, they could hear Japanese patrols shouting to each other, searching, cursing, sometimes praying. Then, one evening, a chilling sound cut through the rain, a voice on their own frequency. This time, it wasn't British. It was Japanese, and it was mocking them. "British soldiers, you are surrounded. We can hear you too now." For the first time, the Chindits felt the same dread they had inflicted. The psychological war had turned circular. Two invisible armies, taunting each other through the static, neither certain who was real. Wingate called it the fog of minds. His men called it the whisper war. Still, they pushed on. They sabotaged railways, ambushed supply convoys, and vanished before dawn. But the jungle took its toll. By the time the first Chindit expedition withdrew in August, half the men were dead or too sick to walk. They hadn't conquered Burma, but they had changed the war. Because for the first time, the Japanese army, the same force that had swept across Asia with mechanical precision, was made to feel fear. Fear of the unseen. Fear of voices in the dark. Fear that even the earth beneath their feet might be lying to them. And that fear would linger long after the last Chindit left the jungle. August 1943. British headquarters, Imphal, India. Brigadier Orde Wingate stood barefoot in his tent, staring at a map soaked with rain and sweat. His beard had grown wild, his eyes sunken, the look of a man who'd seen both genius and madness reflected back at him. Around him, the humid air buzzed with static from field radios. Every few minutes, a coded message crackled in from deep behind Japanese lines. Survivors of his first Chindit expedition reporting in. Wingate's concept had worked. Barely. Of the nearly 3,000 men he'd sent into Burma, fewer than half had returned fit to fight. Yet their psychological and tactical disruption had rippled through the entire Japanese command. Reports from Tokyo described officers blaming invisible English ghosts and radio phantoms. One captured Japanese logbook contained a chilling line, "The jungle itself betrays us." That was Wingate's victory, not a battle won on the ground, but a war of the mind. He believed that in modern warfare, fear was an instrument as sharp as any blade. He'd made the jungle his ally, a living, breathing accomplice that spoke through radios, wind, and rumor. And for months, it worked. But behind that triumph lay exhaustion, fever, and loss. Wingate's men adored him and feared him. He demanded impossible endurance, often leading from the front, eating the same rations, sleeping under the same monsoon tarp. Yet his vision was unrelenting. If the enemy controls the roads, then we will not use roads. If he controls the sky, we will move beneath it. When the second Chindit campaign began in 1944, the jungle was no longer an enemy to be survived. It was a weapon to be aimed. Now supported by American airdrops and coordinated with Merrill's Marauders, Wingate's ideas reshaped how the Allies fought across Southeast Asia. Small units, deep infiltration, psychological pressure, the blueprint for modern special operations. Still, the voices never stopped. Even after the Chindits withdrew, Japanese patrols continued reporting strange broadcasts for months. Some were Allied deception units. Others were echoes, radio feedback from the endless green void. But some, no one ever found the source. To the Japanese, Burma became a haunted land. To the Allies, it was proof that the mind could be as powerful as a rifle. Wingate himself would not live to see victory. In March 1944, his transport plane crashed into a jungle hillside in Manipur. When search teams found the wreckage, his body was burned beyond recognition, but the map of Burma was still folded in his pocket. As the monsoon clouds rolled over the hills, the last surviving Chindits sent a final radio message before extraction. Mission complete. The jungle is quiet again. No one ever heard the jungle talk after that. But those who were there swore, sometimes when the wind moved through the trees, you could still hear the whisper of "Forward company, hold your fire."